Part 1, The Shadow Beyond Rome. They were never supposed to rule an empire. To the Romans, they were shadows beyond the Rhine, nameless faces in dark forests, wild men who worshipped trees and carried axes with heads as wide as their fists. Their name was whispered with contempt and fear. Franci, the fierce ones, the bold ones, or simply the free. They called themselves Frank. They did not build cities of marble or carve roads through mountains. They lived in wooden halls and smoky villages, bound by kin and oath, not by empire. They farmed small plots near rivers, fished in quiet streams, hunted boar in deep forests. Their chieftains wore no crowns, only iron rings to show the number of warriors they could call upon. To them, Rome was a distant world, a place of impossible wealth and alien gods. But as the empire faltered, the shadow beyond the Rhine began to move. For centuries, the Romans had tried to tame them. Legions crossed the Rhine, built forts, demanded tribute, installed puppet kings. But the forest swallowed the legions. Disease, ambush, winter, the land itself fought back. And the Franks, patient as wolves, waited in darkness for their moment. That moment came when Rome grew weak. As the 5th century dawned, the Western Empire was rotting from within. Generals fought generals, emperors rose and fell in months. Gold ran out, frontiers crumbled. The Rhine, once a border guarded by legions and law, became a river of ghosts. The Franks crossed, not as an army of conquest, but as families seeking land, as bands of warriors offering service, as migrants carrying gods older than Jupiter and laws older than Caesar. They came as foederati, allies in name, mercenaries in truth. Rome hired them to fight its enemies. Other Germanic tribes, rebel Roman generals, even fellow Franks. They fought for coin, for land, for glory, but above all they fought for space to breathe. In the dying days of empire, one man rose among them. His name would echo through all of Europe's future. His name was Clovis. But before Clovis there was Childeric, a king with no throne, only a warband. A ruler of a people, not of lands. He wore Roman brooches on his cloak, carried a Roman sword at his side, and buried himself with golden bees in his tomb, symbols of rebirth, power, and immortality. When he died, his son Clovis inherited not a kingdom, but a promise. That one day, the Franks would be more than shadows beyond the Rhine. They would be masters of the world they once feared. And Clovis, raised in Roman courts but baptized in forest blood, carried that promise with a heart as hard as iron. Part 2, Clovis, the first king of the Franks. He was only 15 when his father died. Too young to rule, too old to be dismissed. The warriors gathered under the gray dawn, frost biting their beards, and swore fealty to him. Not because of law, there was no law. Not because of divine right, their gods did not care for crowns. They swore because they saw in Clovis something rare among chieftains, purpose. From the moment he took command, Clovis saw the world differently. Where his father saw alliances, he saw conquest. Where his elders saw boundaries, he saw opportunities. He knew that if the Franks remained divided, they would vanish like mist before the sun. So he began with blood. He fought rival Frankish tribes first, bringing their warriors under his banner. Some joined willingly, others with blades pressed against their throats. Within a decade, he ruled the Salian Franks, a people who lived not in Rome's forests, but within its crumbling cities along the northern Gaulish plains. But Clovis was not content to rule Franks alone. To the south lay Syagrius, the last Roman general in Gaul. His kingdom was a ghost, a patchwork of Roman law, half-empty villas, crumbling roads patrolled by mercenaries paid with what little tax silver remained. To his people, he was the last light of civilization in a barbarian sea. To Clovis, he was prey. In 486 AD, Clovis marched south. His warriors wore wolf pelts, iron helmets, carried spears etched with runes of victory. At Soissons, the armies met. The Roman cavalry charged once twice, but the Frankish shield wall held. When the lines broke, Clovis, warriors fell upon them with the fury of men fighting not for pay, but for survival. Syagrius fled to the Visigoths. They handed him back to Clovis, and Clovis executed him without ceremony. With that, Roman Gaul was dead. In its place stood something new, not yet an empire, not yet France, but a kingdom born of both worlds. Clovis kept Roman administrators to collect taxes. He let Roman bishops hold their courts. He wore Roman cloaks stitched with gold, sat on Roman chairs in stone halls built by legions long dead. But at his side were Frankish warlords, men who still prayed to Woden before battle and drank blood wine beneath oak trees on winter solstice. Clovis stood between two worlds, and he knew it could not last. If he was to rule Gaul, he needed more than swords. He needed legitimacy. And so he turned to God. His wife, Clotilda, was a Catholic Burgundian princess. For years, she begged him to convert. Clovis refused. What use did a warlord have for a god who died nailed to wood? His gods gave him victory. Her god gave him humility. But in 496, at the Battle of Tolbiac against the Alemanni, his gods were silent. His warriors fell back, the shield wall buckled, death loomed. In that moment, Clovis prayed to a god he did not know. Jesus Christ, if you give me victory over these enemies, I will be baptized in your name. The tide turned. The Alemanni king fell. The Franks roared victory to a god they did not yet worship. True to his word, Clovis was baptized in Rheims by Bishop Remigius. As the holy water washed over his forehead, the bishop whispered, "Bend your head, proud Sicamber. Worship what you have burned, burn what you have worshipped." Thousands of Frankish warriors followed their king into the waters. The gods of the forest fell silent. In their place rose Christ, carried not by meek priests, but by a warrior king who saw in him a path to rule all Gaul. Here, in that cathedral of stone and echoes, something new was born, a Christian Frankish kingdom. A kingdom that would become a dynasty that would become an empire. Part 3, The Rise of the Merovingians, Bloodlines and Betrayal. Clovis had done what no Frank before him had dared to dream. He united his people. He conquered Roman lands. He baptized his warriors into Christ's name. And with each victory, he laid the foundation stones of a dynasty that would echo through the Middle Ages, the Merovingians. But kings who build with blood often leave cracks in their walls. When Clovis died in 511, his kingdom did not pass to a single heir. Frankish custom was clear. Sons inherited equally. Unity dissolved overnight. His 4 sons divided the realm like hungry wolves tearing at a corpse. They took cities and fields, villages and churches, carved borders with blades, and trusted no one, not even each other. Yet despite their rivalries, the Merovingian kings shared something deeper than enmity: ambition. They ruled from wooden halls draped with Roman silk, held court in old villas rebuilt with Frankish timber beams. Their queens wore Byzantine jewelry. Their scribes wrote Latin prayers beside Frankish laws etched in runic script. They were a paradox, forest warlords wearing imperial robes. And it worked. Merovingian Gaul grew strong. Trade returned. Bishops blessed their reigns, calling them Rex Francorum, kings of the Franks. Peasants plowed lands under laws written by priests and enforced by warriors whose ancestors once hunted wild boar in Saxony. But beneath this stability festered the poison of their inheritance. The Merovingians were a family at war with itself. Brothers murdered brothers, mothers poisoned sons, Queens plotted against queens. Stories spread of assassins slipping into royal chambers with daggers hidden in candle wax. Chronicles recorded so many betrayals that scribes simply wrote, and again, treachery was done when tired of detailing each murder. The most infamous of all was Queen Brunhilde, a Visigothic princess married into Frankish royalty. She ruled as regent for decades, waging wars against her sister-in-law Fredegund, a queen as cunning and cruel as any king. Their feud stained Gaul with blood, their assassins leaving corpses in churches, roads, and royal beds. But even as their dynasty rotted from within, the Merovingian kings maintained one thing no other Germanic kingdom achieved: continuity. They did not collapse into petty tribal chieftains. They did not vanish like the Vandals or fade like the Ostrogoths. Their courts became centers of culture. Latin literacy revived. Monasteries multiplied, copying texts lost elsewhere in Europe. The seeds of what would become medieval Christendom were planted in Merovingian soil. But by the 7th century, something strange happened. The kings grew weaker. The crown no longer sat on warriors. It rested on boys, shadows of their ancestors. Real power drifted to those who held the keys to the royal halls, controlled the treasuries, commanded the armies. They were called mayors of the palace. And among them rose a name that would end the Merovingian line and forge an empire greater than anything Clovis ever imagined: Carolus. Charles. Part 4, Charles Martel. The hammer of the Franks. By the dawn of the 8th century, the Merovingian kings were kings in name alone. They sat on carved thrones, robed in silk, crowned with gold, but their hands trembled when they raised their scepters. Real power walked the palace halls with ironclad footsteps. The mayors of the palace, stewards turned rulers, men who commanded armies and held the realm together while puppet kings recited blessings written by trembling scribes. Among these mayors rose a man whose name struck fear across Europe. His name was Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer. He was born of scandal. His father, Pepin of Herstal, had sired him out of wedlock, and though Pepin ruled as mayor, Charles was never intended to inherit anything. But fate has little respect for inheritance. When Pepin died, the kingdom fractured. Rival claimants tore at each other. Neustria rose against Austrasia. The Saxons invaded from the north, the Frisians rebelled, and everywhere warlords sensed weakness like wolves smelling blood on the wind. Charles was imprisoned by his stepmother to prevent his rise. He escaped, gathered loyal warriors, moved like lightning across Gaul, crushing armies 3 times his size, forging victory from chaos. Within years, he ruled as the unchallenged mayor, the true king in all but name. But his greatest trial was yet to come. In 711 AD, across the Pyrenees, a new power had risen. The Umayyad Caliphate, masters of an empire stretching from Persia to Iberia, swept into Visigothic Spain with fire and steel. Within years, the cross was replaced by the crescent across Iberia. And the tide did not stop at the mountains. In 732, the Umayyad forces crossed into Frankish lands. Their army was vast, veteran, armored in lamellar steel, led by Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi. They burned towns, enslaved thousands, and pressed north toward Tours, a city whose monastery held relics of saints the Franks believed protected all Christendom. Europe trembled, the Pope prayed, and Charles Martel gathered his men. They met near Poitiers. The chronicles call it the Battle of Tours. The Franks formed a shield wall, deep and silent. They did not charge, they stood rooted like oak trees, waiting. Again and again, the Umayyad cavalry crashed into them, but the line held. Charles' warriors fought with the desperation of men defending not just land, but faith, kin. Everything they believed gave meaning to their blood. When Abd al-Rahman fell, the Umayyad army broke. The Franks slaughtered them in the forests as they fled south. Europe exhaled a prayer of relief that became legend. Charles Martel returned to his halls not as mayor, but as savior of Christendom. He did not claim the title of king, but everyone knew the hammer ruled. He began reforms that would shape medieval Europe, granting land to warriors in exchange for service, planting the seeds of feudalism. Under his rule, monasteries flourished, missions spread into pagan lands, and the Frankish realm grew stronger than any Roman province had been in centuries. But Charles' greatest legacy was not his hammer blow at Tours. It was his bloodline. His son, Pepin the Short, would end the Merovingian puppet kings and take the title of King of the Franks. And Pepin's son would become the greatest ruler Europe had seen since Caesar, a man named Charlemagne. Part 5. Charlemagne, the father of Europe. The boy was born in 742 AD, in a world trembling between darkness and dawn. His father was Pepin the Short, the first Carolingian king, who dethroned the last Merovingian puppet and had himself anointed by the Pope, binding Frankish swords to Roman blessing. His mother was Bertrada of Laon, wise and politically shrewd. They named him Karl Charles, but the world would remember him as Charlemagne, Charles the Great. From youth, he carried an aura of inevitability. Tall, broad-shouldered, with fierce blue eyes and a commanding voice, he seemed carved from the same oak that held his throne aloft. But power was not inherited easily. When Pepin died, the kingdom split between Charles and his brother Carloman. Tension thickened. Two kings cannot share one crown. Then unexpectedly Carloman died. Many whispered poison, others called it providence. Charles wasted no time mourning. He seized his brother's lands, unified the realm, and turned his gaze outward to the pagan world beyond Frankish borders. First came the Lombards in Italy. Pope Adrian I called for aid against their king, Desiderius. Charles crossed the Alps with an army hardened by northern winters. In 774, Pavia fell. Charles took the iron crown of Lombardy and placed it upon his own head, becoming king of the Lombards, protector of the papacy, master of Italy. Then came the Saxons. For over 30 years, Charles waged holy war against them. The Saxons, stubborn forest tribes worshipping old gods, resisted fiercely. They burned churches, slaughtered priests, and fell upon Frankish garrisons in winter raids. Charles retaliated with equal ferocity, executing thousands at Verdun in a single day to break their will. Monasteries rose where sacred groves once stood. Crosses replaced rune-carved poles. Their resistance died with their gods. In the south, Charles repelled the Umayyads in Spain, creating the Spanish March as a buffer zone. In the east, he crushed the Avars, seizing their treasures, gold and silver amassed over centuries, to fund churches, palaces, and schools. But conquest was only part of his legacy. Charlemagne dreamed beyond borders. He envisioned a realm united not merely by blade, but by faith, law, and learning. He gathered scholars from Ireland, Italy, and beyond, men like Alcuin of York, who taught in the palace school at Aachen. Latin literacy spread. Scriptoriums flourished. Old Roman texts were copied and preserved. Law codes were refined. Administration strengthened. Europe, fragmented for centuries, began to pulse again with an imperial rhythm. And then on Christmas Day, 800 AD, in the great Basilica of St. Peter in Rome, as Charles knelt before the altar in prayer, Pope Leo III placed a crown upon his head and proclaimed, "Charles Augustus, crowned by God, great and pacific Emperor of the Romans." The crowd roared. Frankish nobles bowed. Roman clergy wept tears of joy and fear. In that moment, the Western Roman Empire, dead for over 3 centuries, was reborn in name. But this was no Roman emperor. This was a Frankish king wearing Rome's ghost as a mantle. Charlemagne ruled for 14 more years. His empire stretched from the Pyrenees to the Danube, from the North Sea to central Italy. He standardized currency, reformed the church, defended Christendom's frontiers, and defined what it meant to be emperor in medieval Europe. But when he died in 814, his empire, like all empires, trembled on the edge of fracture. His son, Louis the Pious, could not hold his father's legacy together. His grandsons fought and divided the empire in the Treaty of Verdun, laying the political foundations for what would become France and Germany. Yet Charlemagne's shadow remained. He was remembered as Pater Europae, the father of Europe. Holy Roman emperors for centuries claimed descent from him. French kings called themselves his heirs. German emperors called their realm the Holy Roman Empire in his name. But more than his bloodline or his wars, it was his vision that endured, that Europe could be more than tribes and warring kingdoms. That faith and law could bind where swords alone could not. That from the wild forests of the Franks, something greater than Rome could rise. Conclusion: from tribe to empire. The story of the Franks is not merely the story of conquest. It is the story of transformation, from shadows beyond the Rhine to masters of Gaul, from pagan warlords to Christian kings, from a scattered people to the founders of an empire that would shape Europe's destiny for 1,000 years. They were not Rome's children, they were its successors, and in their hands the old world ended. A new world began, one born not of marble and legions, but of oak and iron, of faith carried on swords, of kings who prayed in Latin but ruled with Germanic fury. They were the Franks. They did not inherit the empire, they became it.